What kind of goddess is the earth? In Plato's Timaeus, he writes about the earth as a goddess, and Proclus, his most systematic interpreter from antiquity, has a long discussion about the earth and her powers and what we owe her and what kind of goddess she is. I hope now to start a series of short videos on this issue, and it'll take some time because Proclus quite quickly brings a lot of high-level metaphysics to bear on his discussion. But I hope this will help you not only understand more about the earth from a Platonist point of view, but also some metaphysical theories that the Platonists developed. So let's start by reading the passage in the Timaeus about the earth as a goddess. He, the demiurge, the engineer of the cosmos, also a deity, which Proclus identifies with Zeus, but that's a different issue. He contrived the earth to be, on the one hand, our nurse, but on the other hand, since it is concentrated around the pole that has been extended through everything, it is guardian and creator of both night and day, the first and most senior of all such gods as have come to be within the heavens. So there's lots that's interesting in this text, and we'll get to many features of it. But so, for instance, the word that's translated as concentrated, ilomenen, is a debated reading and can be read in more than one way. One way can be that it means that Plato thought that the earth moved. And, he says that it's the creator of night and day. Night and day also are mentioned as gods in Greek texts. And it's very curious that he says that she is the first and most senior of all such gods that came to be within the heavens. So the earth has a certain priority. And so these are just a few of the aspects that we'll get to. Proclus first discusses the place of this passage in the Timaeus. And we'll skip this at first, because today I want to get to the beginning of his discussion of what is the earth. So he writes, "What then is the earth? From whence does it proceed?" Right? Where does it come forth from? How is it said to be our nurse? And how is it said to be the most senior and very first among the gods? Should we prove capable of understanding these things, then we will have a theory about it that is surely sufficient for the purposes at hand, understanding the Timaeus. The earth, therefore, proceeds in the primary manner from the intelligible earth, which includes in a unitary manner the intelligible order, diakosmos, of the gods, and which is established eternally in the Father, and from the intellectual earth that has been made coordinate with the heavens, and which receives all the productions of the heavens. So let's pause here, because here is what I mentioned. He already comes at us with some very heavy metaphysics, talking now about an intelligible earth and an intellectual earth, besides the physical earth that he's ostensibly talking about. So what is he? What are these intelligible and intellectual earths? Are they other gods? Is he saying that the earth as a goddess, like this earth that we live on, is our nurse and is guardian of day and night, it descends from other gods? I don't think that's what he's saying. I think he's talking about different phases or natures of one and the same God. And so this is where we have to get into a bit of explanations. So first off, we have to talk about, what is this polytheism of Proclus? So, why does he think that there are many gods? To the best of my ability to understand him, the idea is that appearance, presence, intelligibility, the fact that there are things and that they can be understood, and that they appear to one another, and that they act on one another, and that they appear and disappear, and that they are there, this is a phenomenon, this is a complex phenomenon that has many different facets, that has many different aspects, universal aspects, like causal connection, the fact that things are connected by cause and effect, or that things are in time and are in space, that they follow certain logical rules, that there is justice in the world, that there is beauty. All these things are different aspects, different, and not just aspects, but grounds, principles, starting points for there to be presence and appearance such as we know them, such as we participate in them. And each of these starting points is universal. It has to do in some sense with all of appearance, and it is also unique. It can't be reduced to the others. So, for instance, we can't derive time from logic. We can't derive language from knowledge. We can't derive justice from any of these, or beauty from justice. Each of these has something unique about it, something that can't be drawn from the others, and they are all fundamental. And it's these things that are God's, right? So every universal, unique aspect of the world, by being a starting point, it's analogous to the origin of all things, which Proclus calls unity and also value, or the good. And since each of them is analogous to this universal this unique starting point of the world, since it brings something unique to the world, it embodies that unity in some way. So it's actually a complex thing. There's a simple unity, and there's the universal aspect that embodies it. Such a simple unity with a universal aspect that embodies it is what Proclus calls a God. Okay, universal here is also called in Proclean texts unparticipated, or I sometimes use things like unincorporated or not embodied, because, for instance, it's like justice itself is not the justice embodied in any particular thing, in any particular system of justice, or any particular just person or just spirit. It's just universal justice, right? So that's the idea that it's a not embodied justice, it's a universal justice. Right? So each of these universal aspects embodies a certain simple divine unity, and the divine unity together with the universal aspect is what we call a God. Now, some of these aspects can be very complex, right? They're not simple unities. They are things like, for instance, time. Time has many different facets, right? So time involves the idea that there is change, that there's a succession of moments, that these moments are ordered. Time itself is homogeneous, and it serves as a measure for different, for things that are heterogeneous, for processes that are heterogeneous. It involves the notion of parts and wholes. So it's a very complex thing, time. And yet it has to be the embodiment of some unique and simple unity, because it has something unique about it. So there's like a gap between the unity it embodies and its own complexity. And Proclus has arguments to say that this kind of gap can't exist in reality. For you to say that a simple unity is the ground of a complex phenomenon, then we have to have, as it were, a series of phases or stages, intermediate things that depend on the unity and that produce the final complex thing. And these are what I was talking about earlier when I said that the intelligible earth and the intellectual earth, they're not different goddesses. They're actually phases of this one goddess, the earth, right? So she starts off as a simple unity, which will also see mentioned as a henad in many translations and discussions. And then there are these intermediate beings, or modes of being there, which are called the intelligible earth and the intellectual earth, and there are other ones. To make this a bit clearer, we should say that also in our case, for Proclus, there are these phases or different natures. Because for Proclus, our true identity is in our immortal life, our psyche, right? Traditionally called soul, but it's not soul in the sense of your personal essence, right? What makes you you and you a human being, right? Your soul, your individual personal essence. No, for Proclus, what is most basic about us is an immortal life, a source of change, and which on its own is a changing a changing subject of knowing, right? It knows one thing, it assimilates that thing, absorbs that thing, changes by its knowledge, and then it knows another thing, and then it knows another, and then it assimilates that other thing, and then it knows a third thing, and so on and so on. So we are basically these constantly changing acts of knowing, activities of knowing. And these are things that are naturally in time. They know one thing after another, but they don't have parts in space, and they don't even have a position in space. So they're much simpler than our bodies, right? So also here we have mediating phases, right? So in Proclus, we'll talk about as how we have three bodies. We have an astral body, a pneumatic body, and the oyster or terrestrial body, which is the one that we touch and that doctors treat and physiotherapists, put in order. So these are phases as well. Since I mentioned them, and they'll come up again about when we're talking about the Earth in another video, let me just explain them a bit. So the astral body, that might sound very woo-woo, and you might have heard about people astral projecting and so on. But from a philosophical point of view, from Proclus's arguments, the basic thing is that this is what gives us position in the world, right? The astral body is made of light, and for Proclus, light is what constitutes place, constitutes space. So the fact that we have an astral body for Proclus is what gives us a place in the cosmos, a place in the world, a spatial perspective. It puts us in some particular place. It has other functions as well, but that's like its basic, as it were, philosophical function. So through the astral body, we have a position, right? If you read philosophy and you know some contemporary philosophy, you might know Wittgenstein's Tractatus Logico Philosophicus, where he has this famous diagram about where with a dot and then, as it were, an oval coming from it, representing the eye and what it can see. And then he says the eye does not see itself, right? So that is what the astral body is. It's just this point, it's just this eye, And indeed, it's all made of light, and that makes it, as it were, a body that's purely ocular in some sense for Proclus. And so it's what gives us this perspective, right? This place in the world. And of course, if you're blind or you have deficient eyesight, this having a perspective will be expressed for you in a different way, right? We have other ways of experiencing our positionality in this world to do with, for instance, our sense of touch, and it gives us a position. But so that's the astral body is like positionality. And so the pneumatic body has to do with our image, right? So this is what people talk about when they talk about like aura or the vibes that someone gives off. So, oh my gosh, that person gave off really bad vibes, or that person is like great to be around, just feel great about them. So this has to do in part with our self-image, but of course our self-image can be wrong, right? But so it's this figure of imagination that we carry around. So imagine that, like, when we talk about portraits, right? We talk about how a portrait, painted by an artist, it's not just a photograph of that person, taken by a selfie, but somehow it's supposed to capture who that person is and transmit something of that person. And so it's much richer than just what the eye gives us, right? the artist has translated into visual perception something a much richer image of that person. So that's the pneumatic body. And so it's also like what we naturally think of when we think of our body, because we don't relate to our body as, what the doctor and the physiotherapist know, right? Because we don't think about how we have all these organs that are squished against each other, and that we have to be careful, we have to have good posture to make sure that everything is in order, and we're not conscious of exactly which muscles we're using when we do this or that. We just relate to our body as this thing that we know naturally, and that we can just command and do and it does what we want. So this pliable body, this body that's actually made of, as it were, just imagination, that's the image body, that's the pneumatic body. And through it, so if the astral body just gives us positionality and a place in the world, and so that makes us a bit more, it puts us in space. The pneumatic body, it puts us in the middle of things that can be imagined, right? It puts us in the middle of the changing world, the perceptible world, right? But since it's an image, it's not yet tied to specific organs and so on, right? And of course, we have these unfortunate effects of how we frequently find that our physical body, what Proclus calls our oyster-like body, is not exactly what we imagine it to be, and it's actually faulty and it's not working well and things like that. And so that's the third thing, which is but since it's an image, not just in the visual sense, but in the full sense of all of our senses, right? So we can think about it having smell and warmth and taste and so on, right? It's everything that we can also get transmitted through vibes, or transmit through vibes. Since it's that, it has something in common with the terrestrial, with the physical body, because it does have all these perceptible properties. It doesn't have mass, it doesn't have weight like our physical body does, but it does have perceptible properties, right? And the astral body, it has like barely perceptible properties. It has mathematical properties of being in space and position, but it doesn't actually have anything that you could really poetically sink your teeth into. But it already has a place in the world, and that's a bit more than just our pure life, which is just this constant activity of knowing. And so this is just to illustrate here how we have these different phases that connect who we really are to our bodies. And also in the case of the gods, there are these different phases that connect what the god really is, the divine, simple unity, unique unity, and the complex, universal aspect of appearance that the god, that embodies that unity, and that unity grounds. So this has already been almost 20 minutes, so I'll stop here. And in the next video in this series, I'm going to talk a bit more about what this means for the earth, right? We read that Proclus says that the earth proceeds in the primary manner from the intelligible earth and from the intellectual earth. So what are the phases of the gods? And what is the intelligible phase and what is the intellectual phase, right? So I hope to, God's willing, I'll be able to continue this series, and we'll be talking more about the earth and Proclus soon enough. Thanks. Bye.